My sister sold my wedding ring so that she could pay for her honeymoon. Story time. So my sister and I literally never got along. She was literally always the golden child. She would constantly cry to my parents so that she could get her way. And my parents spoilt her like no other. Growing up, I literally hated the way she acted, but I tried to ignore it and just get on with my life. So one day when my parents were driving to work, they got in a really bad accident and we lost both of my parents. Of course, I was absolutely heartbroken, but in a way, I was kind of glad that there was no one there to spoil my sister anymore. However, sure enough, she found somebody else to leech on and she got a boyfriend. When she said jump, he said how high. And eventually they ended up getting engaged. Poor guy. And as you can probably imagine, my sister had big plans for this wedding. She got the most expensive dress, she got a massive venue, she got a caterer, went wild with the decorations. And she really wanted to cap it off with a honeymoon in Hawaii. With all the spending she'd been doing, she had run out of money. Did she call to bail her out? 10 points if you guessed me. She called me. My sister knew that I was doing okay, my husband was very well off, and she had the audacity to ask me if I would give her the entire honeymoon for her wedding present. And yeah, I could 100% afford it, but was I gonna do it? No. There was absolutely no way I was doing that for her, the way she treated me and my parents growing up. This woman begged and pleaded, but there was no way I was giving in. A few days later, I returned home from work, and you know when you just feel like something is off with your house? Realised that my ground floor window was open, and I literally never opened that window, so it was not me. I was looking around and pretty much everything seemed normal, but then I found my jewellery box and realised that quite a few bits were out of place. And that was when I realised that my wedding band and my engagement ring had gone missing. And let's just say, it didn't take me long to work out who the culprit was as to where it had gone. So I made sure not to confront her right away. I wanted to get evidence. I was taking pictures. I even bought a fingerprint kit. A fingerprint kit, that's hard to say. And I used that to test the area. All this happened a week before her wedding. So 7 days later, I attend the wedding without saying a single word to anyone. Wedding was really nice, but she spent a lot of money, so of course it's going to be nice. Then, the next day, she got on a flight to Hawaii, her dream honeymoon destination. Who was on the flight out afterwards? Me. So when I got into Hawaii, the first thing I did was get in touch with the police. And I gave them all the evidence that I had collected. They were able to confirm that my sister was in fact the crook based on her fingerprints. And when they asked me where they could find her, of course I told her, because she told me everything. She told me where she was going, what dinner reservation she was going to have, what hotel she was going to. So I made sure to arrive at this fancy restaurant at the same time as the police. I sat in the corner with like a proper little detective setup. I had a hat on, sunglasses, and I was snapping all of the pics. Ones of her getting into handcuffs. I got ones of her getting into the cop car. Just as she was looking out the window in the police car, she turned to me and I waved her goodbye. I wanted her to know that I was the one that had ratted her out. And as soon as I got back to my hotel, I sent all of the pictures to our friends and family. And now they no longer want anything to do with this pathetic little girl. Apparently her husband had absolutely no idea that this was going on. He was mortified by her behaviour and has left her already. And from what I know now, she lives in a tiny little apartment somewhere. My husband named our daughter after his ex-girlfriend. Story time. So when I was pregnant with my daughter, me and my husband had so many discussions about what to name her. And we both only ever wanted one child, so this was really important to us. Then one day, my husband suggested the name Amy, and I love this name. And I'm not gonna lie, I had always wondered why he really liked that name and why he chose it in the first place. I always wondered if it was someone he once knew or if it was a relative, but he always just said that he just really liked the name. And you know, so did I, so that was the name we went with. So a few months later, our darling daughter Amy was born. So my husband had never really spoken too much about his past relationships. I'd always made a bit of an effort to ask, but he always said that there was no one special to mention. He'd never met anybody like me before. So I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really push for it, I just accepted it because I thought, you know what? Solid answer. So when my daughter was a few months old, I decided that it was time to have a clear out the house. So I decided I'd start with the attic. And I wish I'd never done it. I found a box of letters that my husband had written to a woman called Amy. I had found my husband's love letters to his ex. And in this, they're talking about getting married, their future together. I'm a confrontational queen, so I asked him about it and he just blew it off like it was no big deal. He said that he dated Amy back in high school and that he just really liked the name even before dating her. Okay, Steve, whatever you say. He said that he never told me it was obviously his name of his ex because he didn't want me to get mad. Well, guess what, Steve? Now I'm mad. And now every single time I look at my darling daughter, I can't stop thinking about his stupid ex. Listen, I tried to accept the fact that it's no big deal, but this is just something I cannot get on board with. So it's been years since this happened and he thinks that I don't care anymore. Recently, I've been playing it to Steve like, God, don't you think Amy is so lonely? She'd love a little brother or sister. I suggested that we should try for another baby and he was not into this, but that didn't stop me. Let's just say that I got pregnant again. Steve wasn't the happiest about this, but I know that deep down he was genuinely excited. And I'm not gonna lie, it was a bit of a rough pregnancy, but we ended up having a little baby boy. Wonder what we're gonna call it. And my husband said that since he chose our daughter's name, I could choose our son's name. Steve was telling me that he couldn't believe that he didn't want another baby. He loved this baby so much. I decided that we were gonna call this new baby Dave. We were in such a little bubble when we were in the hospital. But as soon as we got back and we were home, I packed my bags and I moved in with Dave. Obviously not the baby Dave, my ex-boyfriend Dave. I had already sorted out all of the divorce papers to hand to my ex. I should be expecting child support anytime soon. Mine and Dave's spark is just as bright as it was back in high school. And I am so glad that we've managed to rekindle all of this after years of texting throughout my marriage. Even though my new Dave doesn't have the biological father that he thinks he does, I'm going to end up changing his name. And my plan is that my ex Steve will have custody of Amy and I will have custody of Dave Jr. I'm sorry, what? This has to be the most over-the-top reaction to this type of thing that I've ever seen. I have 3 questions. 1, why was he keeping the letters from his ex? 2, what the hell did you do to fall pregnant again? And 3, how long had you been planning to leave Steve for? I beg you, leave your opinions in the comments. Am I the arsehole for telling my disabled sister that she won't be getting any inheritance? Story time. So I have 4 siblings and my younger sister Amy is disabled. And because of this, my parents dedicated 100% of themselves to her. And they pretty much left the rest of us to fend for ourselves. Growing up, I was pretty much the main caregiver for all of my siblings because my parents were too busy with Amy. I would do all the chores, I would look after my siblings. And I should probably make it clear that Amy's disability does not stop her from doing anything. She's more than capable of doing everything herself. She doesn't require any extra care. She doesn't require 24 hours surveillance or anything like that. She is more than capable. But my parents have literally always spoiled her rotten and she's so rude. So my grandparents passed away a fair few years ago now and I inherited all of their money pretty much. I inherited about $6 million. The reason I received all of it and none of my other siblings did is because I was really the only one that gave a crap about them. My grandparents were very aware of how my parents treated us, so they didn't really talk to my mum. They very rarely spoke to her, so I got left it all. But at this moment in time, I haven't spoken to my parents for over 6 years. But recently, Amy started college and she burnt out her whole college fund in 4 months. Apparently designer bags were just more important than rent. I'm very aware that this makeup is coming very grey. I'm trying to fix it desperately. So for a little backstory and context, when my younger siblings started college, I helped with all of their college fees. I paid for pretty much everything. And my only sort of rule was that they did well. However, now that Amy is struggling, my parents ended up calling me out of nowhere and they demanded that I gave Amy some of my inheritance money to help her out through college. I ended the call with my mum by telling her that Amy was the only kid that they had in their mind for 18 years. Now they have absolutely no right to demand things from the kids that they literally abandoned. And naturally, I'm getting shit from everyone. So here is some little bits of information that may help you form a bit of a better opinion. I have no clue what Amy's disability actually is. My parents never told us, or they never told Amy either. And then when I asked my mum why she couldn't get any governmental help or funding, she said it's because they don't have a written diagnosis anywhere for Amy. I always remember my parents fighting about how they need to take her to different doctors because other doctors refuse to give her a diagnosis. And I'm not gonna lie, through writing this, I'm starting to now think if my sister is actually disabled. My uncle also gave me a call the other day and told me that they were thinking about starting a pregnancy rumour that was pregnant so that I would have to pay them, and then when I said I wouldn't do that, they said that they were going to turn around and say that, well, I'm someone that likes to hurt babies. So should I end up helping my sister or should I keep the money and keep putting it into my other siblings? Am I the arsehole for wearing sexy clothes around my roommate's boyfriend? Story time. So I live in the city and I share my apartment with 2 other girls. I work 2 jobs and when I get home, I'm usually absolutely exhausted. So when I come home, I'll normally just make tea, have a shower and go straight to bed. All of this was absolutely fine until one of my roommate's boyfriends started to stay over more often. This did not bother me at all. Last Sunday morning, I was in the kitchen just making myself some coffee and Amy's boyfriend Steve came in and asked if he could have some coffee as well. And from this, we just got chatting. After about 15 minutes, Amy came in and she looked visibly annoyed. So I asked her what was up and she was just like, nothing, and then walked out. When Steve left, she came into my room and asked if she could talk to me about something. She told me that my boobs were distracting. She told me to consider wearing a bra or even a thick hoodie when I'm in the common areas of our flat. And then she went as far as to suggest that I just buy takeout so I don't need to use the kitchen when her and their boyfriends are in the house. The thing is, when I was making coffee that day, I was wearing a grey t-shirt and grey tracksuit bottoms. And Steve, the boyfriend, was just in his boxers. And she was wearing this silk little cute night dress from Victoria's Secret. For some context, Amy is 6 foot tall, she's stunning, she's modelled in the past. So I'm 5'6", and even though I'm happy with myself and how I look, I just don't compare to her. Like, I would never be classed as a threat to a girl like her. So I obviously thought all of this was a joke, so I laughed. And then she started to cry, which was kind of awkward, and told me that her boyfriend had started to talk about my boobs all the time. I was so grossed out. So all of this week I've been buying takeout every night and staying in my room. So yesterday I came home at 6 p.m. with a pizza, and my roommates and all of their boyfriends were already in the kitchen and in the living room. So I just kept my head down and walked straight through and went straight to my room. That was when I heard Amy shout pizza again. If you keep eating like that, you're never going to fit through your bedroom door. Am I wrong for not inviting my adopted parents to my wedding? Story time. So I'm getting married to my fiance of 2 years in May. When I was a baby, I was adopted by a couple in their 50s. They did everything for me. They supported me through college, put me in a good education. Literally anything I wanted, I had. We always had a good relationship and I love them to bits. So when I was 23, I decided I wanted to go on a hunt for my biological parent. Long story short, I found out that they had me when they were 14 and they just couldn't support me back then. But that they were still together and they actually had 2 more children. I also found out that they had tried to contact my adopted parents when I was in my teens. They said that they had really wanted to form a relationship with me, but my adopted parents had refused any contact. So when I confronted my adopted parents over all of this, they said that they'd refused because they were scared that I would prefer my biological parents over them and leave them. I was absolutely heartbroken over this, so much so that I actually cut down my contact with my adopted parents. Recently, our relationship has massively improved and we are back on good terms. So for the wedding, I asked my biological father if he would walk me down the aisle. And he obviously said yes. When my adopted parents found out about this, they said that their worst fear had come true. They also said that if I insisted on putting my biological parents before them, that they weren't going to attend the wedding. So I spoke to my biological dad and said, would you be happy for both of my dads to walk me down the aisle? And he was super supportive of this. However, my adopted parents refused. They said that they had done all the hard work and if they had to share the spotlight, they didn't want to be involved at all. So I told them that I would give them a couple of days to think about it. And they came back saying that if they weren't the ones to walk me down the aisle, then they weren't coming. And with that, they were uninvited. Since then, literally all of my adopted family has been calling me an arsehole. So am I the arsehole here? I'm leaving my boyfriend to go back to my ex. And I don't get why my boyfriend is so upset about it. Story time. So 2 years ago, I dated this guy called Steve. I don't know if I really believe in soulmates, but if they do exist, Steve is my soulmate. We broke up because it was a right person, wrong time situation. When we broke up, we both said if we were meant to be, we'd find each other again in the future. But recently, I started dating this guy called Dave. And I had said from the start I wasn't intending to get into a relationship with this guy. It was just supposed to be like a casual vibe. It was like friends with benefits at most. He asked me why and I explained everything. The conversation went a little bit like this. Why don't you want a serious relationship? Because I have some unfinished business with my ex. That last chapter isn't finished, so why would I start a new one? Well, why can't you just close the chapter now? Because I'm not ready. But when will you be ready? I don't know. Well, whatever, I'll just wait for you anyway. I can't lie and say I don't have feelings for him, but he's just nothing compared to Steve. So after 5 months of dating, he finally stopped asking me to be his girlfriend around month 3. I mean, that's probably because I said, if you ask me one more time, I am going to step away from you. Anytime we started to get a little bit too serious for my liking, I reminded him that we weren't exclusive and that there was no strings attached. I even encouraged him to date other people. I was open and honest this whole time. So cut to the chase. Steve is back. I ran into him in a coffee shop the other day. We were there for so long we ended up getting kicked out. It was like everything came back at once. At night he took me out on a date and we talked so much that our food went cold. He was telling me all about his life, all the changes that he'd made, and all the reasons and obstacles as to why we broke up last time had all disappeared. So then I told him about my life and I also told him about Dave. And he asked if there was any chances for him. So on the way home from the date, I immediately called Dave and told him everything. It destroyed him. So after this, I waited 3 weeks before officially breaking up with Dave. Dave then proceeded to call me the devil. I was honest with him the whole time. So what do you think? Am I the arsehole? Am I the arsehole for slapping my cousin after what he did to my cat? Story time. This all happened last night and I've just woken up to the biggest shit show ever. So me and my family have these monthly big meetups. And I have a cousin who we'll call Tom, who is the biggest brat ever. To say he's a pain in the ass is an understatement. So for the context, I'm not feeling too great. I'm struggling with a little bit of the food poisoning. So whilst all of my family were around, I just chilled in my room, played on my Xbox with my little kitten Penelope. But I'm just chilling, having a nice time, and Tom barges into my room and screams at me that he wants to play on the Xbox. And at this point, I would usually just allow it and let him have a go. But I was really in that I'm not taking no shit mood and told him to just get out my room. But apparently he wasn't having any of that. Next thing I know, he is stood at the side of my bed screaming full volume into my ear. At which point I just told him to fuck off. He turned around, went to walk out the room, then turned back at me and proceeded to kick Penelope against the side of the bed. And I don't really know what came over me. I got out of my bed so quick and slapped this boy across the face. And I told him to never touch my cat again or I'd do much worse. He ran down the stairs and I could hear him talking to my uncle. He was crying and being an overall little bitch. My dad came storming into my room and was yelling at me, telling me I was wrong for what I did. But that was when I reversed that and was like, he kicked the cat, Dad. Then my dad stopped, turned around and calmly walked down the stairs and then let rip. This morning I have woken up to many abusive and threatening messages from my uncle and my cousin, and it's now progressed to messages from unknown numbers as well. So what do you think? Am I the arsehole? My husband cheated on me, so I gave him a taste of his own medicine. Story time. Me and Steve had happily been married for 4 years before he one day decided he wanted to propose the idea of an open relationship. I immediately shot this down, it just wasn't for me. So a few months passed and I started to notice some weird behaviours from Steve. He was going on more nights out with his friends, late night phone conversations, and we were growing more and more distant as the days went on. So I suspected the worst, so I decided to hire a private investigator. And this confirmed my worst fears. Steve had been seeing someone else. So instead of confronting him, I decided to hatch a little plan. The revenge was sweet and simple and perfectly fitting for the situation. I invited an old friend, Alan, over. Alan was an actor, and Alan was more than ready to play his part in this retribution. So I called Steve and I told him that I'd be working one night really late in the office, so I wouldn't be able to answer the phone. When in reality, I was actually just round at Alan's deciding what we were going to do. We were preparing for an Oscar-worthy level performance. So the next day, again, I texted Steve and told him that I would be working late. And it wasn't rare for Steve to just let himself into my apartment whenever I was working super late. So me and Alan sat on my sofa and just waited for him to walk in. Just as planned, Steve walked in and me and Alan was sat super close on the sofa, bottle of wine on the go. So as Steve walked into the room, Alan launched into action. He launched himself on top of me, started kissing me, and Steve just stood there in the doorway, frozen. And that was when Alan looked up from the sofa, looked Steve dead in the eye and said, "Oh, I didn't realise your ex-husband was going to be back so early." The mention of ex-husband was the final straw. Steve bolted from our house. That wasn't the end. No. The next day, I served Steve with our divorce papers. And that was when I explained everything about the night before with Alan, that it was a setup, that I knew exactly what had been going on. The look on his face was priceless when he realised the lengths I'd gone to. I was proud that I didn't have to stoop to his level to prove my point. So I guess in the end, maybe he did get his idea of an open relationship, just not in the way he expected. Am I the arsehole for being upset that my sister wore a wedding dress to my wedding? Story time. So for some context, my sister Amy is a trans woman and I have always supported through every single step of her transition. I actually met my now husband Steve through Amy. They had always been friends and I met him 3 years ago and we've been married for 1. And when we told our family, especially Amy was absolutely thrilled. So everything was completely planned and I left finding my wedding dress till the very last minute. I wanted to lose a little bit of weight, so I left it till right before the wedding to get it sorted. So from about the age of 16, me and my mum had always had the agreement that I would have her wedding dress. And it was such a key part of how I saw my wedding going. One day, all these expectations came crashing down. Me, my mum and Amy were all sat at the dinner table one day and I turned to my mum and asked her about the wedding dress and when I could try it on. They both suddenly went suspiciously quiet and then just completely avoided the question. Eventually, Amy turned round to me and admitted that my mum had given her wedding dress to wear to a pride party. Needless to say, I was absolutely heartbroken. And on further inquiry, I found out that my dream wedding dress was now stuffed in the back of someone's loft, covered in rainbow paint. My mum said that she hadn't expected me to actually want the dress because I was a little bit too overweight for it, which, not gonna lie, stung a bit. After that, I just walked out and tried to be a bit of an unbothered queen, when in reality I was actually really bothered. So fast forward to my wedding day. So me and Steve decided that we were gonna have a black and white theme for our wedding, and we told all of our guests to wear either black or white. I actually decided to get a black dress because I thought, you know, it's a little bit different. The day before my wedding, I asked Amy what she was planning on wearing. She made it very obvious that she wanted her outfit to be a secret. So the next morning, me and all my bridesmaids are getting ready and we couldn't find Amy anywhere. And she was the maid of honour, so we were freaking out. But then half an hour before the ceremony, she texted me and said that she was already at the venue waiting for me, which I thought was strange. But just as I was walking down the aisle with my dad, I saw Amy. She was at the bottom of the aisle wearing my mum's wedding dress that was still covered in rainbow paint. I looked at Steve and Steve looked livid. My mum and dad were both absolutely mortified by Amy's behaviour and told her to never ever speak to them ever again. Now Amy is saying I'm an arsehole for not wanting to share my big day with her. So what do you think? My sister's dating the love of my life. Story time. I really don't know what to do about this situation, so any help would be much appreciated. But my sister started dating this new guy and she has not stopped telling us how brilliant he is. So we were all set to meet him at this family party that one of our friends was throwing. Don't ask me how we got onto this, but we started to play hide and seek. I ended up hiding in the bathroom, but I didn't realise that there was already somebody in there. There was this guy in there who we'll just call Steve, was drinking beer in the bath. I'm not gonna lie, I was so over the party so I couldn't be bothered to be found, so I just got in the bath with him. So we start sharing his beers and he finally gets around to telling me why he's in the bathtub. So after about an hour of being sat in this bathtub with this guy, I just have the sudden urge to like kiss him. And my mind starts running away with me. I'm like, I'm going to introduce him to my parents. We're going to get married, have babies. But about an hour into our conversation, he gets a phone call and he answers and says, "Hey babe." He's like, "I'm so sorry, I've just been throwing up in the bathroom." And I was like, I have been throwing myself at this guy for the past hour and he is dating someone. He turns to me and says that he's got to go and he's got to go meet his girlfriend's friends. And that was when it clicked. I think this is my sister's boyfriend. So we quickly run out the bathroom together. I head downstairs and I head straight to my sister and all of her friends. Me and Steve end up at the same location. And that was when my sister introduces Steve as her boyfriend to all of her friends. Not gonna lie, this was the beginning of the end for me. As the weeks followed, Steve was round at our apartment all the time. And the more and more he was round our house, the more my feelings grew for him. It was bad. And one day, he invites me to lunch. Just me and him. And when I asked him why, it's because he said that he'd noticed I'd become really distant with him. We spent hours together. And as the night was approaching, he says to me, "Why don't we make a bet?" He says, "If you win, I'll do anything you ask. And if you lose, I get to ask you anything." So anyway, fast forward, I lost. And he asks, "Do you have feelings for me?" I stick by the rules of the bet and answer honestly. So I told him that I did have feelings for him. And then, plot twist of the century, he tells me that he has feelings for me too. He said he'd felt this way about me since we were drinking in the bathtub. He then went in to kiss me. And I'm not gonna lie, guys, I didn't pull away. All my morality went out the window. I was kissing him like it's the last thing I ever did, because if my sister find out, it might have actually been. Now, whenever he comes round to our house, he always comes into my room at night and sneaks a cuddle. And I don't feel guilty because I know that we're meant to be. I cheated on my husband with his brother and I have no regrets. Storytime part 2. Make sure to check out part 1 here. So like I said, I got home and my husband was sat on the sofa waiting for us. He was bloody fuming. He asked me why I thought it was a good idea to take his brother. And I was like, well, you weren't going to come, so I wasn't just going to go on my own. But he was saying that the right thing to do would have been to discard the ticket. My husband then started to get a little bit leery and he would not calm down. The only way he would relax was if Steve was to wait outside. So Steve went and sat in the car. So at the moment, I'm in my sticking up for myself era. So I asked my husband if he'd had any girls over whilst we were in Fiji. And of course he did. And then he got really, really mad at me. And then he began to question if he was even the father of our children. Like, what? He was accusing Steve of actually being the father. He was like, they even look like him. Like, babe, your brothers, they're gonna look somewhat like him. So now he's forcing me to get a DNA test on both of our children. And after this, I straight up told him that I wanted a divorce. And I was actually shocked by how he reacted. He got so upset. Not the get up and start crying upset. More so the defeated. He lowered his head, like really disappointed. It was at this moment that he realised how much he had messed up. And not just the relationship with me. He realised that he'd ruined part of his kid's life. And he'd also done a lot of bad things to Steve as well. He then apologised. and he began begging for us to be able to work through it. And I'm not gonna lie, I really heavily considered this because I saw the guy that I'd fallen in love with in high school again. But then I stood up and realised who the fuck I was and realised there was absolutely no way in hell this man was getting another chance. He was begging me to make sure that he would be able to see his kids. And I said that that wasn't an issue, but it had to be on their terms. After this, I chucked my husband out the house. I booked him an Uber and I told him to go wherever he needed to go. He packed up his stuff and went really peacefully, actually. After that, I told my kids to go and unpack upstairs and just take some time to chill. And this meant that me and Steve could have a chat about how we were going to move forward. We spoke about everything that had happened on the trip and how special it was for us. And we decided that we were really going to give it a go at dating. But we agreed that we were going to do this once the divorce was finalised, and it would also give the kids some time to readjust as well. I told the kids that they were more than welcome to see Steve whenever they wanted to, but he wouldn't be moving in with us straight away. Okay, so some little random updates. The kids have been in therapy because I thought it'd be a good idea for them to go to it. There's been a lot of big changes recently, and they seem to be getting on really, really well. The DNA test came back, and it proved that my husband was, in fact, the father. And then during our divorce proceedings, my husband's decided that he would like to get sole custody of the kids. This being the man that called them little brats, didn't want to go on holiday with us and hasn't looked after them for the past 2 years. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Am I the arsehole for telling my brother that his pregnancy announcement is trashy? Story time! So my family has this gifting programme where if you sign up, you have to spend £21 on whoever you get in the little system. It's like a whole thing. There's a Google Doc with all of people's sizes, any snacks they like, any allergies, that type of thing. We do this every year, and when the kids go to sleep, we all do the gifting. My brother Steve and his girlfriend Amy both signed up to be on this list. And on this specific day, they had asked to go last because they had something that they would like to open all together. Literally everybody followed the assignments on the list. Steve and Amy spent approximately £5 per person. So everybody opened their gifts, it was going really, really well, and then it came to Amy and Steve's turn. We all opened the gift to find a picture frame with a sonogram in it. And this picture frame was maximum £2, like it was not expensive at all. And then on the back of the picture frame, there was a note that says £35 has been donated to our baby when it arrives. And I'm not gonna lie, the photo frame wasn't even nice. It was so tacky, and it had these like puffy like letters on the front that says Baby Bella 2024. So they had essentially not gotten us a gift, but had donated money to their own baby in our name. We obviously said congratulations and then spoke about the baby for a little bit. So then my dad was like, should we get this exchange all finished then? It started to get really, really late at this point, and he needed to get home because he'd got work the next day. So he turned to Amy and was like, do you want to go get the rest of your presents? And that was when Steve turned around and was like, that was the gift. And at that point, the vibe dropped. Steve got up and went to the toilet, and my dad went after him. We all did that awkward thing where we just sat in silence, and we could hear them having this raging argument in the hallway. And at that point, Steve just stormed out. My dad was seething. He was so angry. I've actually never seen him that angry before. He was like, this is absolute bullshit. Everyone can take their gifts back that they got Steve and Amy because I'm not having this. He was like, they knew exactly what they were doing this whole time. And a few people actually did take their gifts back, and then they all left. But most of us just sat there until everything calmed down, and then we went home. So a few days go by and I hear nothing from Steve or Amy. And then out of nowhere, Steve turns up at my house with a gift, and he even apologised. Everything was literally fine until I asked how Amy was. And he was like, well, she's been crying for the past 2 days, so I'll let you guess that one. He then said, and pass a message on to Dad to say thank you for ruining our surprise. He then went on to ask if I liked the gift. I was like, nope. And he asked why, and I decided that I was just going to tell him the truth. I said that everybody else got you a real gift that they spent money on. I made it very clear that although it was a lovely gesture, that isn't the point of the gift exchange. I told him the way you did it felt cheap and tacky. And at that point, he walked away from me and called me an arsehole. So what do you think? Am I wrong here? Am I the arsehole for not letting my siblings come to my wedding? Story time. So all my siblings are significantly older than me, and I wasn't invited to any of their weddings growing up because they wanted a child-free wedding. So I of course thought I'd be an exception because I was their little sister, like I was part of the family. My older sister Amy got married and she was the first to have a child-free wedding, and then everyone like sheep just followed. When she got married I was 10, so I kind of could see where she was coming from, but you know, I was still really upset. Then my older brother got married when I was 12, and I obviously wasn't invited to that one. And then my sister got married when I was 15, so I was like, great, this is my time, I'm coming to this wedding. because she had said that she wasn't going to have a child-free wedding. And of course, all my siblings chimed in and convinced her to have a child-free wedding. So she decided that she was going to cut out everyone from the wedding list that was under 16, which obviously included me. And at this point, I got really, really upset that I wasn't going to any of these weddings. So I screamed at my sister and my parents grounded me for 6 months. 6 months. Then my other brother got married when I was 17. So I thought, surely I'm in for this. But not gonna lie, at this point, I was past the point of caring and I was assuming that I wasn't gonna be invited for some silly reason. And of course, I wasn't invited, so I just sent him a really shitty text message that said congrats, and I didn't say anything else about the wedding. The wedding was happening, I just stayed in my room all day with my now soon-to-be husband. So I decided to get a little bit petty, and since I'm now getting married, I decided that none of them were allowed at my wedding. But when the invitations went out, and obviously they didn't get one, they turned up at my house. Ariana, what are you doing here? So I very simply explained, you didn't want me at your wedding, so now I don't want you at mine. I explained that it really, really upset me that I didn't get to see any of my siblings get married and now they should feel the same way. Their excuse. Oh my god, their excuse was that there was alcohol at the wedding and they didn't want any young, impressionable eyes seeing people drinking. And all I wanted was to be included in the wedding part. I didn't have any bother about the after party at all. How long have I had powder in my hair? I'm so sorry. My mum then started screaming like I have never heard anyone scream so loud in my life. She was screaming about how she wanted all of her kids to be together on a beautiful day. It's very ironic, Susan. It very clearly said that if they wanted to be invited for the wedding, I needed a very good reason as to why I wasn't allowed to come to theirs. And not just because of my age. Explanation, no invite. It made no sense to me why they left me out of literally everything up until now. Bit of an awkward silence. Then the truth came out. I wasn't actually their sister. I was actually their cousin. My jaw hit the floor. So apparently my dad was raising me, but when he passed away when I was 2 months old, they had no clue who my mum was. And that was when I was passed over to be raised by my uncle, so my dad. And when I was young, apparently I required quite a lot of attention. So my brothers and sisters started resenting me quite heavily. My brother Steve even went as far as to say that he hated me for that reason. My parents admitted that they were really ashamed that they had never told me. And I just didn't know how to deal with this, so I got up and left. Drama was too much for me. So what do you think? Am I the arsehole here? My husband's ugly best friend ruined our engagement, so I laughed whilst he got deported. Story time. So me and my fiance Steve have been planning to get married. We have been together for 5 years, so agreed it was time to tie the knot. But there was just one problem. My husband's friend, Steve. Steve was from another country and he'd been living in ours for a few years. And he was legal because he was married, obviously, to this girl called Amy. Amy loved this guy so much, but I don't even think Steve liked her. I think he only married her so that he could get a green card. And Steve, I'm not gonna lie, he got lucky to find someone that had married. He is not a nice person. He is a solid, 4 to 3 out of 10 on a good day. He has the personality of a wet leaf and overall just had really bad hygiene. I don't even really know how my husband was even friends with him because, ugh. So one day I was at home and I could hear my fiance on the phone to Steve. Steve was boasting about how he'd been cheating on Amy with another woman. He was like, I am so proud of being able to get another woman. I was shooketh. This man was cheating on what I can only say would be the only woman that would ever want to marry him. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of surprised that there's another woman on this planet that would want to get with him. I didn't really care too much for Steve's words, but it was my fiance's response that really wound me up. My fiance was cheering on Steve, saying how he deserves more than one woman and every man deserves to have more than one woman in his life. I have never felt rage like it. I just kept thinking that if my fiance was applauding someone for cheating, then he would probably cheat on me too. So as soon as my fiance left the room, I told him that I had heard everything and that I could not be with somebody that supported cheating the way that he just did. He then started spouting all of this bullshit about how he was going to make it up to me at our wedding. I legit laughed in his face. I was like, you think there's a wedding, babe? This wedding is off, so you can go and tell all your friends and family to return the wedding gifts. So after ending it with my fiance, I wasn't done yet. I decided that I was going to call up Amy, Steve's wife. Took my big old spoon and started stirring the pot. When she picked up the phone, I told her word for word the conversation that she'd had with my fiance. And as you can probably guess, she was furious. And I was like, babe, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do? Do you think you can work past this? She's like, no, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And I was like, ooh. But they say, hell knows no fury like a woman scorned. So when Steve got home that day, Amy slammed divorce papers down on the table. And apparently, Steve lost his shit. He was freaking the fuck out. He realised that his wife Amy was the only reason why he was allowed to stay in this country. And the INS took Steve away literally the day that those papers were signed. Amy even went as far as to send me the ring camera footage of when the police turned up. And I'm not gonna lie, it was the funniest thing I have seen in a very long time. Can I just say, I think this might be the most savage of all of the story times I've ever done. Let me know what you think.